You're watching The Ready Writer, a show where I get to speak to writers of all different genres, mediums, and experiences. The Ready Writer. Are you ready?
You are watching another episode of The Ready Writer. I am your host, and today's guest is LB Harpdog. Let's get this show started. All right, so first question I have, were you as a child wanting to be a writer, or was this something that came on later in life?
This is something that came on later in life, and it was due to a heartbreak, a breakup, or what have you. And I had to because it was one of those, what do you call it, forbidden loves. So I ended up actually started writing because of needing to get all this emotion out.
Awesome. And were you in when you chose to write it, was this like a journal, a personal journal, private journal, or was your intentions for it to be a book?
Um, I I promised my ex that I would actually write a book about how I felt about her, about our love, because it was, I mean, it was beautiful, it was magical, it was everything that I've never experienced. And so I decided to, you know, just start writing because I was in a dark place. I was heartbroken. I was, falling apart. So when I started writing, it was one of those things where I just needed to have an outlet. And it actually developed into a crazy story that included vampires and actually ended up being wrapped into a sci-fi erotica type of story. So yeah, it kind of evolved into that.
That's amazing how it went from one extreme to the other. So when you started, because you said, okay, I'm going to write this book, was that just the first thing that came to your mind to do? Because most people, when you say write a book, they start thinking of the logistics of it, the grammar, the spelling, and the then how to get it published. So were you thinking about all that at the time, or was it just I need to write or do something to get all of this emotions out of me from this past relationship?
It was me just writing about how I felt, how I, if things were different between us, what I would say, how I would apologize, how I would win her back, what I would do to, cross heaven and earth to make it back to her. Because of being selfless, I ended up pushing her away. So when I started writing, it was everything that I really felt about her and wanted to say to her but didn't.
Understood. Has this person have had the opportunity to start reading? I know it's a five-book series, and you've only done three so far. Has this person had the opportunity to read any of them?
I'm not sure. And all five books are done. It's just the three are a vampire series, and then the other two are kind of follow-ups to that story.
Okay, they're not
Because
published
there's,
yet, right?
yeah, two are published. One is,
Okay,
uh, I have what they call the vampire series, First Night, Second Night, and Third Night with the Vampire. And those are three individual books. Then I have She Wolf Alpha, which actually comes after the third book, and that is about Juju herself, her past, her history, when everything changed, then in the future. And then this is also then the last one is actually with Guy and Christina, because there's five main characters. There's LB, Palmyra, Guy, Christina, and Juju. And so the last one is with Guy and Christina, more focusing on them too.
cool. So, in your journey of writing and publishing, um, well, what I will say is, because I'm just perplexed because I guess your experience in this relationship is what drove you because most people get fearful when it comes to publishing a book and you decided you're just going to do it. And so what were some of the things you've learned and what was some of the things you would say encouraged you despite of maybe your lack of knowledge of publishing a book? What encouraged you to do it anyways?
My love for her, and I wanted the world to know how I felt about her, was what drove me. When I wrote my first, because I've written about maybe 11 books now, but uh, my first book was a horrible book, but it was called Time to Play series. and it was just a few short stories and everything else, and of how romantic I wanted to be with her and everything else. The first two books, and the third book is actually more of a time to play book three. That was actually a pick and choose your desires. So it was actually a really cool layout, and that's what I was able to share with her. And then after we end up just completely cutting ties, that's when the heartbreak set in, and that's when I started writing the vampire series. My Night Blue, first, second, third night with a vampire. So when I started writing, it was just about getting my emotions out there, is how I felt about her. And then I ended up actually writing it on the platform, which I'm not going to mention here, but I ended up writing it on the platform, and I had readers who would give me instant feedback. So they were also able to help me kind of, what do you call it, curtail or develop the story, because I would just ask for different scenarios, but it was still how I felt about her. And when I started publishing, it was the worst thing. I mean, I had grammar mistakes. I had wording in there that didn't make sense. It was just horrible. So I had to pull it down. And then that's when I was told to have an editor, because I ended up having an audio person wanting to read it. And it's like, I can't read this mess. It was horrible. So they started reading. I mean, so I started editing and paid a lot of money to have editors done. It was still horrible. So I ended up learning how to do it myself. But I was not afraid to put it out there. And the reason why is because I wanted her to know how I felt, and that our love was real, and it was nothing to, it wasn't just emotions. It was actually the connection.
Awesome. So is this right now in your mind, is this the only book or series you plan on doing, or now that you've gotten your, as they say, feet wet, do you plan on continuing with other ideas of publishing books?
Yes, I'm actually working on a couple of different ones. One is like an alternate universe, and then of vampires. But I was actually wanted to turn that series over to another friend of mine, where she's going to write about another character that I kind of developed, and so she's going to run with her series called Just Blue of Bluestoria. So she's going to run with the vampires and everything else, and I'm actually going a different direction. And then I had started to write a book called Walls Around My Heart, and it was about somewhat what happened between us, the reason why we couldn't be together, and it got too difficult. So I kind of put that on the shelf when I made it to 13, and everyone who said they read it loved it. But it was just way too emotional for me because I spilled everything. So I'm working on those two books as we speak now.
Awesome. What you mentioned editing. What else did you learn during the process that was eye-opening to you as far as writing and publishing a book?
Well, I had purchased quite a few different programs. I have maybe 10 grand mixed up in the My Night Blue series, the book covers and everything else, because I ended up having to redo the book covers 3 or 4 different times. The first one was a really cheap Canva version, and then I ended up having hire another person to make it for me. Then I ended up hiring a professional to make the final book cover. So learning how to do book covers was an eye opener. Then learning how to actually do what I call editing as far as grammar, listening. What I did was I took my document, and there's a free program called AdVoice that you can download, and you literally will upload your document to it, and it will read it back to you. And if you have tons of errors and bloops, and let's say the wording isn't correct, for instance, it was correct, but it just didn't flow well when reading, that will pick it out to where I was able to readjust and rewrite. So I literally listened to my book maybe 50 times, and each time I was able to catch something new. Once I finally got done with that, I learned how to format it through Word doc, because I used to use Draft to Digital, and it's a good program and it's free, but it was one of those situations where I wanted it to be prettier, I wanted it to be better. So I learned how to format it through Word doc, 5x8, and that is what I use to upload my books on Amazon and Kobo and Barnes & Noble and other places. So editing was definitely the most challenging for me, but I've learned so much from that. Plus, I've learned that you don't have to pay for everything. There's free programs out there, but you need to get the right free program to be able to do everything yourself. So I've been working with maybe 6 or 7 different authors on how to get their book published for little to nothing. They only have to pay for the programs, not having all that extra work. So they can get their book published for maybe $300 or $400 versus me the 10 grand. So learned a lot about that.
Thank you for that suggestion. Did you say at voice?
Yes, at voice is what I use. And I was turned on to it because I was watching YouTube, and there's a lady that was saying that she wanted to listen to all of her Amazon books and all the rest of her books that she had purchased, and she just didn't have time. So she had ad voice, and it was able to be changed voices from a man to a woman to a kid or whatever. You know, just one voice will read the whole book, but whatever point of view it's from, it was kind of nice to be able to do that. So when I found that out, I would drive for hours, and then I would just push play and listen. And then when I would find a mistake, I'd pause it, pull over on the side of my, pull the vehicle over, pull out my document, and just change it right then and there. And that is how I was able to edit my books and find the time. Besides that, to sit down and just listen to it, I couldn't do it.
That's amazing. So just again, it's at AT and then voice.
Nope, it's just the at symbol sign.
Oh, okay, at voice.
Yes, at symbol sign, and you can pull it up and everything else. It was, it's just a wonderful program, and it will catch 98% of your mistakes. It will catch grammar. It doesn't catch punctuations, but it catches your grammar and your wording and your misspellings, which is what my book was horrible about.
Yes, my first, I would say 3 books was horrible. And I finally said, let me get someone to edit this because this is not good. It looks bad on me. So when was your first book published? What year?
My first book was published October of 19, and that was the first time to play book series. I had book 1, book 2, and book 3, and I had actually purchased the Kindle Cash Flow program, which cost me almost about $1,200, and everything else. And I learned a lot. It didn't help me as far as sales, but it helped me learn how to structure a book. It learned how to get the book covers done. It introduced me to Fiverr, Upworks, many different other places that I never knew existed. So when I finally got my book done, I was able to have a song made specifically for the book. I was able to have book covers and GIFs made. I was able to have even learn how to do a YouTube intro, where I was able to take the songs that actually fit my book, because mine is more like a movie. It's not just a book. It literally has a playlist soundtrack. It has play songs at certain times. It has a lot of emotion in it, and at the same time too, it even has different symbols in there. For instance, MHSTY, my heart sings to yours. That's how I said I loved her. So it allowed me to be able to develop my brand, not just a book. And that's what a lot of people mistake it from. Instead of developing their brand, they just write a book and they think it's nice and then they move on. Well, if you develop a brand, the brand will be something that when people see it, they remember that book, or they want to figure out what it means. So that's why I had started, the brand that I have, which is the MHSTY.
So you started your publishing process, well, you've published your first book during the pandemic, which I'm sure you know is challenging for authors, because prior to the pandemic, there are hundreds of ways to market. The main way is book signings and festivals, book festivals. So what were some of the things you creatively decided to do to market your book, considering you have more limits during this pandemic?
I decided to branch out into T-shirts and hats, uh, hoodies, muscle shirts, you know, and have the logo MHSTY on it. And then I end up actually having, because of the book My Night Blue, it ended up being such a big hit on many other platforms. I decided to take that and just market the the My Night Blue, because I have a nice little logo symbol for that. And so I am marketing that right there, which helped me during the pandemic. And it kept me busy, especially during the heartbreak. I many times you always want to reach out and go back, but I had to just focus on getting this story done and getting it out there so I can fulfill my promise to her that regardless of whether we're together or not, people will know how I felt about you. So doing that, I was able to get books made. I was able to get uh, a couple wine glasses with the symbols made on them. I was able to get T-shirts, hoodies, a online store set up. So doing all of this helps with the marketing of the brand. And yes, it does cost money to get set up, but it's also residual income. And that residual income is actually going to, go into just a savings pot because I don't really need it, but it's nice to be able to just put money away for the winter later. But yeah, so doing all of that during the pandemic was able to keep me busy instead of going crazy and staying at home and staring at the wall.
Well, there are hundreds of YouTube videos, thousands, and books and things out there on publishing books. One of the main challenge people tell me who say they want to be an author is either taking the time to write a book. If it's nonfiction or a memoir, they don't know where to start, or they don't know that they're ready to go back down memory lane. Being that these books are semi-fictional and semi-non-fictional, what advice would you give someone who wants to write a book? They're just stuck at writing the book.
Use your emotions. I mean, we humans do not do anything unless we want to. And the problem is a lot of people have so many trials and tribulations on a daily basis. One day it may be the best day ever. Next day it just may be a blah day. Third day it may be a heartbreak. It may be a loss. And when you start writing about just how you feel, not even, incorporating into a story, but just writing how you feel, it's crazy how much information you have. And when you write from the heart, the story automatically comes to life. But when you start to actually do it, you may write maybe about meeting your love for the first time. Well, you may not use it in chapter 1 or chapter 2, but you may end up using it in chapter 15. Or you may end up writing about a loss, which happened maybe 3 months after you written chapter 1, or your love. Well, then what happens is you may end up using that in chapter 1. So when you write, do not be stuck on writing in order: chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. Write based upon how you feel, and then as you're writing your story, incorporate it little by little, paragraph, sentence, whatever. And that is how I developed my story, because when I started writing, I wasn't going to write about vampires. Hell, I didn't even know about them. And so when I started writing on that, that was the popular theme at the time: vampires and werewolves. So I started writing about it, and mine actually came about unique because I started asking questions about vampires. Where did it get their start? I wanted to know the history and everything else. And people kept saying, yeah, Pennsylvania, da 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 da. I was like, well, many other people have gotten bit by vampires, and why aren't they turning? By vampire bats, why aren't they turning? Well, no one can give me an answer. So I created my own little thing, where they were from space. They're from this planet called Banchilia. It had two moons, no suns. So it was always cold, but because it was cold and they had no sun, they never had temperature. But the thing is they survived from sex, not the blood that us humans think it is. Then on top of that, there was a tragic situation where LB and 4 other vampires actually wanted to escape that crazy, cruel world of sex and lust and power and greed and oppression. So they end up coming and crash landing on Earth, where 3 of them died, and then it was just 2 left. And in order to actually incorporate that, the 2 ended up coming into a disagreement and falling apart. And when they fell apart, that's when he ended up meeting the love of his life, the soulmate. And again, this was about chapter 5 or 6 of my book, where he explains what happens to her, where he kills her. And it was the worst feeling in the world for him because the loss was so great. He finally connected with someone. And that is where I used my emotion and everything else that comes into play. And that's where the songs also are posted when I want an emotion to be drawn out. So writing mind and developing mind is not from chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's how I feel at that day. Even if I don't write it into a certain way, I just may write a paragraph or two on, and just put thoughts of the day. And then I'll put what I'm writing about after I get done writing the paragraph. I write the top, okay, heartbreak, love, sex scene, spending time with family, disappointment, didn't get the job, whatever. And then I would add it little by little into the story as I went. So that's how I developed my story of My Night Blue.
I just want to say I find that very unique, and you might have started a trend. I think it's amazing that you created a soundtrack to go along with your book. Never thought to do that myself. And I hope that is a trend for you, at least as you continue writing. I think that's just amazing. And it's definitely a good idea, because if you choose to create an audiobook, you can add that soundtrack with the audiobook. So
and I set my playlist up on Spotify. So all the person has to do is just go to Spotify, type in My Night Blue, and the playlist pops up. And so when you start reading the book, and I have an audiobook version too, and a paperback. But if you start reading the book, when it says play this, you can actually play this at a certain time, and the song will play. And then you will actually get more emotional because of what you're reading. You can read it during your reading, listen to it during your reading, or you can pause it and just listen to the song and everything else and get immersed in it. And that right there is what I used. So I try to use, many different avenues to really draw out the emotional aspect of my book, because it does have sex every chapter, but the whole viewpoint is more of an emotional level. When a lot of people first read the first couple, they're like, oh, it's just sex. But then when they finally get to chapter 5, which is where he lost her, he killed her, and it's how he did it and how he felt about it, that is when the emotion comes in. And that's when all my readers get hooked. And then by the time they're getting to book 1, they have tons of questions. Well, that's when book 2 started, and then book 3. And I have them easily set up as, 17 chapters. So it's not a long book, but it's so addictive that they end up doing it. So yeah, you may want to just set up a Spotify account and then actually upload your book cover and set up a playlist. And that is how I was able to get the music incorporated, so people don't have to go to YouTube or any other places that gather the music together.
That's amazing. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your journey in this book publishing and writing your book. The last question I have for you is, if you had an opportunity to sit and have a conversation with an author, whether they be dead or alive, well-known or unknown, who would this author be and why?
I'm not sure. And the reason why is because there's some wonderful, wonderful authors. For instance, I guess if I did, I guess it'd be Shakespeare. And the reason why is because he was the one that wrote Romeo and Juliet, and how love is never always a wonderful, perfect thing. It's what you make of it at the time. And then when it's over, or when it's no longer available to you, how do you carry on that love? And the way Shakespeare wrote was so emotional. It was ahead of his time, And now that we are, now that I've experienced it, over 40 something years old now, first time falling in love, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because it allowed me to be emotional. And it came during a time when I lost both parents. I lost, a sibling. It was, I even lost an aunt to COVID. So it came at a crazy time when I had her, Palmyra, with me, talking to me, encouraging me, just being there for me. And she lives in Berlin. And I was able to kind of get through it with her help. And then because of circumstances, we couldn't be together, even though we both wanted to. I had to be the one to step up. And because of that heartbreak, I was able to write this crazy, wonderful, heartbreaking love story that has sex every chapter, but it also has so many twists and turns, people can't figure it out. So Shakespeare is definitely a person I would ask, why did you write it? Who was the one that inspired you? Who was the one that broke your heart? Who was the one that you wanted to be with but you couldn't? And then when you wrote it, you know, why did you turn it into a play? And I'm sure it was for the same reason that I want My Night Blue to be a movie or a TV show, because I want people to know that there are women out there like Palmyra that I love to death, and she is the most wonderful woman I've ever met. You know, and you know, regardless of how we separated, she was my world. She was the one that completed me, and I'm sure Shakespeare felt the same way. So Shakespeare would be a person that I would love to interview.
That is all the time we have for you today on The Ready Writer. I want to thank our guest, LB Harpdog, for stopping on by, and you, the audience, for watching. Thank you. Have a great day.